For the research community as a whole, sharing research data would allow more cumulative research. It also opens up many more possibilities for research synthesis. It also helps avoid duplicating the work or reinventing the wheel. For researchers themselves, sharing research data also has a lot of benefits, such as increased visibility and credibility. For me personally, sharing research data also means ensuring research quality, because the fact that I know the data will be out there, that people can thoroughly examine all the data wrangling and data analysis I've done, I would double, triple, quadruple check my work just to make sure that there are no errors. In addition to these, I also want to mention one more benefit that's important to me. To me, sharing research data also helps promote social justice. The resources for conducting high-quality research, be it funding or manpower, is unfortunately, like many other things in society, unevenly distributed. Big labs with state-of-the-art equipment and a lot of international collaborators could collect high-quality and large-scale data, all of which are beyond the reach of the less well-funded, small team or individual researchers. By making these research data available and open to all, it can help these researchers so that they don't need to worry too much about obtaining data and can concentrate more on the analysis, and they could avoid having to change research questions just because of limited resources.
I would say, particularly the kind of research I do, which is qualitative research and very specifically ethnographic research, the benefits of sharing data are it allows, I guess, new ways of seeing, interpreting, understanding, and applying different lenses to data. It potentially could add some cross checks in terms of what the data means. I'm quite interested in semiotics and ontology and how we make and represent meaning. So I think sharing data helps expand the meaning of our world.
Well, at the MESAM project, part of our own aim, part of the project aim is to share the data, is to make the data about the African archaeological sites and monuments available for the people who need to know it, people who need to use it, and for the general public to increase just the people knowledge about the African monuments and sites and history. This is this part of history has not been on focus as much of other parts of the world, and it does deserve a lot of attention. So we hope that by doing what we do, by collecting the data in the way that we do and by sharing it the way that we do, that we will be able to raise the awareness about these sites and this part of history. We do not deal with the personal data in the sense that people will immediately think of as social media data or maybe personal data about health or so. We mainly deal with data about archaeology, and this data can be sensitive because it involves the location of the sites, and there is always the danger of looting the sites or vandalism or anything bad happening to the site. So people who own this data, the custodians, the local authorities are always aware of this danger, and we try to mitigate it as much as possible by agreeing with them on what levels of data can be shared and what levels cannot be shared. Also, there is a bit of respect, I think, that should be owed to the data about archaeology, because eventually this data represent people who have lived on Earth, and there are a lot of people who are living at the moment and have lived in the past who have connection to this data, and they feel that they are representative of these people. I'm Egyptian. I come from a place where people have very deep connection to the history, and there are many places in Egypt and many situations in Egypt where locals have felt very strongly about certain sharing of data or certain actions towards some of the sites in there. So yes, we try as much as possible not to include any data that can be sensitive in a place that wouldn't be intended for this data, and we always before we share anything agree with the owners of the data that it will be shared in this particular way. And this goes back to the data management plan as well. So if you beforehand know that this data is going to be collected in this particular way and is going to be shared in this particular way, you can include that from the start and people will know about it and they can agree to it. So metadata means the data about the data. I guess this is dictionary definition, but in our case, most of the time, it means we have an archaeological data set which describe maybe a site, but we want to know information about who collected this data, when was it collected, how was it collected, what kind of technologies were used, and all sort of things that goes into making us understand the accuracy and the limitation of this particular data set.
In my own research, metadata is also pretty common. For example, I would assign variable names or value labels, and all of these are data about data. And also when I'm writing a code script, I would add comments and to indicate what a code chunk is doing. And these are also metadata. I also want to say that quality of metadata is also critical. In my opinion, consistency and specificity are two characteristics of good quality metadata. For example, I have seen many public datasets that were poorly curated with a lot of cryptic names and abbreviations. And without proper documentation, it's really difficult to understand what those names mean or what those abbreviations stand for. And the lack of clarity actually makes it very difficult to verify and trust the quality of the data. I have to say, sharing data is a very complicated issue. For starters, there are many practical barriers. We need to make sure that we have the proper consent and approval to share the data. We also need to verify the extent to which our data can be successfully de-identified. But even if we've cleared all those practical barriers, there is also the psychological barrier when it comes to sharing data. As a PhD student myself, I can very much relate to the sense or the feeling of insecurity when it comes to making one's own research openly available for public scrutiny. I read a paper a while ago that helped me look at this vulnerability of openness from a different perspective. The paper is called Fallibility in Science: Responding to Errors in the Work of Oneself and Others. The author is Dorothy Bishop, a psychology professor at the University of Oxford, and I highly recommend you read it as well. People worry about errors being found when they make their data open, but that's precisely the point. It is only through open practice can errors be detected, and that's how we can make progress. What we need to do is to remove the stigma associated with the detection of errors. This is not to say we should condone sloppy work, but simply to accept the reality that we're all human beings and we're all fallible. Of course, it is always important to distinguish honest mistakes and deliberate misconduct, but we should also encourage and respect those who openly acknowledge and correct their mistakes. As open practices become more and more commonplace in the future, we will realize that everyone is fallible. The reputation of a researcher should not depend on whether there are mistakes, but how they respond when those mistakes are found.
One of the main difficulties would be this data should not be shared just for the purpose of sharing the data. It should be shared for a certain purpose. So maybe we try to make this data usable by a certain group of researchers, or we want to raise awareness to this particular type of sites or so on. So trying to get to the data to the form that make it most useful for that particular purpose has been one of the main challenges. The whole history of archaeological science has been about collecting data, And people have collected data in all sorts of ways, starting from paper records, or maybe even before that, all the way to now capturing with phones and stuff. And we have to assimilate all of this into one database, which is a very, very hard job to do. But we try as much as possible to, again, think about the using of this data, how are people are going to be using it, what can we store, what we can't store, and how can we make this database not sparse, so we don't collect every single point of data that is remotely available, because this would mean that this particular point of data might not be available for the other sites, and the database will eventually become sparse. But also in the same time, we try to make it not just about points on a map, saying like, oh, this is a site here, this is a site here, and so on. We try to add some context to it, so it's somewhere in between.